My title is Keeper of Histories for the Galactic Compact, though the words feel like hollow echoes now. My name is Xylar. For 300 millennia, my primary function and that of my order has been to oversee the trial of whispering ghosts, the delicate yet absolute fulcrum upon which the fate of every nascent stellar civilization is weighed. We are archivists of cosmic souls, and the trial was our lens. Its logic, we believed, was a thing of perfect, unassailable beauty. To a species standing on the precipice of the galactic stage, we would not grant power or knowledge. We would bestow a gift of pure context. Ecotech, the silent, graceful carcasses of our own technological genesis, artifacts whose purpose had long evaporated, leaving only the weight of history behind. These were never just objects. They were philosophical anchors. To touch one was to feel the ghost of a billion minds, a civilization that had risen, reigned, and transcended. We would offer a null-point energy core, a sphere of polished obsidian that once sang the resonant frequency of our unification across 1,000 worlds, now so profoundly silent you could feel the void it left behind. We would gift them celestial cartographers, crystalline lattices that, if activated, would project star charts of empires that had blossomed and withered like desert flowers, their homeworlds now barren rock. And we would give them a Grand Com array, a towering monolith of silvery metal that had once broadcast the epic poems of our greatest minds to distant galaxies, now a testament to a voice long since faded. The test was never about re-engineering the past. It was about having the wisdom to kneel before it. Could a young race, full of fire and ambition, pause to appreciate a history that dwarfed their own? Could they show humility before the ghost of a power they couldn't possibly wield, and in that quiet moment of reverence, prove themselves worthy of joining a galaxy defined not by strength, but by perspective? For countless ages, the pattern was unbroken, a predictable and comforting cosmic rhythm. The noble leonine Cathar of the Azure Nebula received their relics and saw divinity. They built magnificent open-air temples of white stone around the artifacts, their priest astronomers chanting hymns to the silent machines, seeking wisdom in their dormant forms. They passed, their culture integrated peacefully. The insectoid Hylians, whose society was a crystalline matrix of pure logic, received their gift and saw a priceless historical data set. They cataloged the ecotech with meticulous, sterile precision, sealing it within zero-atmosphere vaults, to be observed through shielded plates, but never, ever touched. They too passed, and we witnessed the failures. The volatile reptilian Grok saw only tools they could not use, weapons they could not fire. In a fit of communal rage, they smashed the holy relics to pieces. They were deemed too chaotic. Their star system immediately quarantined behind an impenetrable energy veil, left to burn out in angry isolation. Our test was the perfect filter, separating the temperate from the turbulent. It had never failed. Then we found Sol 3, Earth, a single chaotic jewel orbiting a mundane star in the forgotten Sector 7 Gamma. Its dominant species, humans, was a living, breathing paradox that defied every predictive model we had. We intercepted their primitive radio signals and were met with a baffling cacophony. A breathtaking planetary symphony by a composer named Bach, immediately followed by a guttural broadcast detailing a savage tribal war over a patch of dirt. They built towers of glass that scraped their own stratosphere, yet allowed their oceans to choke on their industrial filth. They were illogical, sentimental, self-destructive, and impossibly fragile. But within that chaotic signal, there was a spark, an unrelenting, defiant, almost arrogant curiosity. The Compact's grand algorithm, which had a 99.9% accuracy rate, flagged them as high potential, extreme volatility. After a century of debate, it was decided they were worthy of the trial. I, Xylar, oversaw the delivery myself. From the observation deck of the cloaked vessel Quiet Vigil, I watched the 3 sacred artifacts descend, nestled in grav cradles, and settled gently into a barren, rust-colored desert. The null point core, the celestial cartographer, the grand array. We activated our constellation of invisible watchers and settled in for the decades-long observation. My younger acolytes were eager, placing wagers on the outcome. Temples or vaults, reverence or study. I, however, could not share their placid certainty. Staring at the data stream from that strange blue world, I felt a tremor in the deepest currents of my logic, a sensation so alien I had to consult the oldest linguistic archives to name it. The closest human word was foreboding. We sat back, draped in the comfort of our infallible wisdom, ready to watch the show. In our boundless arrogance, we never once considered that the trial had already begun, and that for the first time, it was we who were the subjects. The first cycle passed, then another. On the vigil, patience is not a virtue, it is an atmospheric component, as essential and ubiquitous as the recycled air we breathe. We had observed species that took centuries to even approach the artifacts, their societal progress measured in geological time. We were prepared for a long watch. What we were not prepared for was the sheer, unbridled speed of the humans. The discovery was not made by a wandering mystic or a prophesied leader, as had happened so many times before. It was made by a machine. A primitive orbital satellite, designed to map mineral deposits, flagged our sacred relics as an unidentified geological anomaly. There was no awe, no divine portent. It was an entry in a database. Within a single rotation of their world, the site was descended upon. Not by pilgrims on foot, but by loud, fume-belching ground vehicles that scarred the desert floor. They established a perimeter, but it was not one of sacred ground. It was a military quarantine zone, bristling with armed guards and temporary structures that bloomed like metallic fungi. My junior archivist, Lyra, was aghast. "They treat the holy relics like a contamination site," she transmitted to me, her emotional register flickering with disgust. I counseled patience, reminding her that cultures express reverence in unique ways. Perhaps this was their form of protection, a crude but earnest attempt to shield the divine from their own populace. Even as I spoke the words, they felt thin, a flimsy shield against a truth I was not yet ready to face. The humans did not build temples. They built laboratories. They surrounded the silent, graceful forms of our past with a spiderweb of scaffolding and machinery that screamed with graceless functionality. They did not chant hymns. They bombarded the artifacts with every radiation in their limited spectrum. They pelted the null-point core's flawless obsidian shell with sonic pulses, attempting to map its internal structure. They tried to pry open the celestial cartographer with magnetic levers, an act akin to using a crowbar on a master's painting. It was horrifying. It was sacrilege performed with the cold, detached curiosity of a biologist dissecting a specimen. "Their scans will yield nothing," another acolyte Vorel stated, his voice laced with the serene arrogance of our people. "The artifacts are shielded by quantum phase materials far beyond their comprehension. They are listening to silence." He was correct, of course. Our ecotech was designed to be inert, its inner workings protected by principles of physics the humans wouldn't discover for another 10,000 years of natural evolution. They were children banging on a locked vault door. But it was the way they banged that was so unsettling. There was no frustration in their failure, only data. Each failed attempt was logged, analyzed, and a new, more audacious attempt was devised. They were not trying to worship the silence. They were trying to break it. The focus of their most intense efforts was the Grand Com Array. The 70-meter monolith of silver stood impassive under their world's yellow sun, ignoring their efforts. They bathed it in radio waves. They covered its surface with thousands of tiny sensors. They even performed what their records called seismic resonance testing, which involved creating controlled explosions in the ground around its base. It was the scientific equivalent of screaming at a sage, hoping to glean wisdom from the echo. Through it all, the compact observers watched in a state of growing cognitive dissonance. Our models had predicted two primary outcomes: reverence or hostile rejection. This methodical, obsessive, and utterly irreverent problem-solving was a third axis our philosophy had never conceived of. It wasn't worship and it wasn't rage. It was tinkering. And as the first year of their study came to a close, they did something that sent a shockwave of disbelief through our entire observation network. One of their high-precision drills, cooled with liquid nitrogen and tipped with a synthetic diamond, finally breached the outer casing of the Grand Array by a single microscopic millimeter. The alarm that sounded on our bridge wasn't for a failure of the test, but for an act of violation so profound, we had no protocol for it. The alarm that shrieked through the vigil was a sound reserved for paradigm-level threats, a sonic signature I had only encountered in historical archives of ancient wars. On the observation bridge, my acolytes were in disarray. Lyra's biomonitors showed her entering a state of controlled shock, her mandibles chattering in a rhythm of pure disbelief. "They have desecrated it," she whispered, over and over. "They have scarred a holy relic." Vorel, ever the pragmatist, was staring at the data stream with a new, unsettling intensity. The serene arrogance was gone, replaced by a focused, almost predatory curiosity. "The drill did not shatter. The casing did not ablate," he noted, his voice a low hum. "The material properties, they are adapting at a quantum level to the intrusion. How did the humans bypass that?" His question hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. He was asking the wrong thing. He should have been asking why they had committed this act of ultimate sacrilege. Instead, he was fascinated by the how. It was in that moment I realized the humans' strange behavior was a contagion. It was beginning to infect my own crew with the one thing our philosophy sought to contain, a focus on pure, unadulterated capability, divorced from wisdom or reverence. A report flashed on my console, a priority Omega alert, transmitted automatically to the Compact's central command. The message was stark. Trial Subject 734, Humanity, has achieved physical breach of a sacred artifact. Intervention protocols requested. The response was just as swift and far more chilling. Request denied. The trial's sanctity is absolute. Observe, record, do not interfere. We were trapped. We were forced to bear witness to the continued defilement. And the humans, oblivious to the existential crisis they had triggered aboard our ship, saw the breach not as a transgression, but as a doorway. Through that microscopic pinprick, they threaded a fiber-optic probe thinner than a hair. What they saw must have been akin to a microbe glimpsing the inner workings of a god. They saw dormant conduits of solidified light. They detected residual chronoton particles that violated their own laws of causality. They were staring into the heart of a technology so advanced, it should have been nothing but incomprehensible noise to their sensors. But humanity, we were learning, had a unique talent for finding patterns in chaos. They did not understand the grand design, but they began to meticulously map the smallest components. They charted the path of a single inert energy conduit as if it were a river on one of their maps. This obsessive mapping continued for another 2 of their years. They built a complete 3-dimensional schematic of the Grand Array's first-level systems. A schematic of a machine they did not understand, created through a keyhole they had no right to open. Then they reached a wall. Their models showed that to learn more, they needed to see a system under power, a catch-22 of cosmic proportions. The machine was dormant, and to activate it required knowledge they could only gain by activating it. Any logical species would have stopped there, classifying the object as unknowable and moving on, not the humans. I watched as their lead science committee held a global televised debate. One faction argued for caution. The other, led by a wild-eyed engineer with unkempt hair, proposed the unthinkable. He suggested they could jumpstart a single isolated conduit in the array using their own primitive fusion power. The proposal was met with derision from his own kind. "The energy feedback would be catastrophic," one shouted. "You could create a singularity," screamed another. My own bridge crew analyzed the plan. Lyra was physically ill, Vorel was silent, but his calculations confirmed our own. A 99.99% probability of a cascade failure that would vaporize the artifact, and a significant portion of the continent it rested on. The plan was not just flawed, it was suicidal. Yet, as the debate raged, the wild-eyed engineer simply shrugged and said something that our translators struggled with, a cultural idiom of profound insanity. "It's never been done before? Fine, hold my beer." The phrase spread like a virus through their networks. It became a rallying cry for the reckless, the curious, the defiant. To our absolute horror, the plan was approved. They were going to do it. They were going to attach their grimy, unstable power source to a sacred instrument of creation, and we could do nothing but watch. On the bridge of the vigil, all other observations ceased. 100 other worlds, a dozen other ongoing trials, all faded into irrelevance. Every observer, every archivist, every junior acolyte was focused on a single data stream from Sol 3. We watched as the humans made their final crude preparations. Massive insulated cables, thick and ugly as hibernating serpents, were clamped onto the pristine silvery skin of the grand array. The low guttural hum of their fusion reactor, a power source we considered barely more controlled than a star, pulsed erratically, a chaotic heartbeat counting down to oblivion. The human engineers, encased in bulky radiation-shielded suits, moved with a calm deliberateness that was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. They were not acting like madmen. They were acting like plumbers fixing a leak, utterly oblivious to the fact that their pipe was a conduit of creation. "They are broadcasting their final countdown," Lyra reported, her voice thin and strained. She had turned her primary visual monitor away, unable to watch the sacrilege directly, focusing only on the data. "Prime Mover Xylar, by the ancient laws, I must formally log my protest. This is not a trial. It is a desecration. We should not be forced to record our own failure to protect a sacred object." "Your protest is logged, Archivist," I replied, my own voice flat, my gaze locked on the main screen. "But you are mistaken. We are not recording our failure. We are recording theirs." It was the logical correct thing to say. It was what our entire history, our entire philosophy, was built upon. And in that moment, I believed it. We were about to witness the spectacular, self-inflicted end of the human experiment. The countdown reached 0. A human voice, devoid of ceremony, simply said, "Engage." The first thing we registered was a wave of pure energy that blinded our sensors, a flash of raw, unfiltered fusion power, a blast of dirty radiation that screamed against the array's quantum shielding. The alarms on our bridge didn't just shriek, they howled, a chorus of technological pain. The energy readings went beyond infinity, into the realm of pure theoretical overload. I braced myself for the shock wave, the visual confirmation of a continent-sized crater. This was it, the catastrophic, predictable end. But it never came. The light, instead of expanding into a fireball, collapsed inward. The howling alarms died into a sudden, perfect silence that was more shocking than the noise. The impossible energy readings did not cascade. They harmonized. On the surface of the grand array, where the humans had clamped their primitive power source, a light appeared. It was not the violent, angry flash of their reactor, but a clean, pure, impossible line of white brilliance. It traced the single conduit they had so meticulously mapped, a glowing vein of lifeblood returning to a limb we had believed dead for eons. The array, which had been silent for 200,000 years, which was designed to be immune to any force less subtle than a god's whisper, had answered them. On the bridge, no one moved. No one breathed. Lyra slowly turned her head back to the main screen, her eyes wide with a terror that had no name. Vorel was leaning forward, his hands gripping the console so tightly his knuckles were white, his analytical mind visibly crashing against the rocks of an impossible reality. He was muttering equations, but they were nonsensical, the desperate prayers of a logician whose religion had just been proven false. I stood frozen, my mind replaying the sequence, the brute force, the chaotic energy, the impossible response. It was like watching a savage beat on a grand piano with a club, only for the instrument to respond not with a discordant crash, but with a single, perfect, resonant chord. The line of light on the array did not fade. It held steady, a brilliant scar of defiance carved into our most sacred beliefs. The humans hadn't just failed the test of reverence. They had passed a test we never knew existed. They had proven that a locked door, if you knock long enough and hard enough, with the right kind of ignorant violence, might just open. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't watching a species. We were watching a force of nature. We were watching the glitch in the perfection of the galaxy, and the universe would never be the same. The silence on the bridge of the vigil stretched for an eternity, a void filled only by the single steady line of light emanating from our monitors. It was Vorel who finally broke it. His voice was a choked rasp, the sound of a mind that has witnessed its own foundational axioms crumble to dust. "It's outputting," he stammered. "The array. It's projecting a data stream." I moved to his console, Lyra trailing behind me like a ghost. On his screen, raw data was flowing from the array, a coherent, structured cascade of information that made no sense. It wasn't history. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't the chronicle of our ancestors. It was a series of complex energy-to-matter conversion formulas and quantum engineering principles. My mind, conditioned by millennia of established procedure, struggled to categorize the information. But Vorel, his intellect now running free of the shackles of reverence, saw it for what it was. He worked feverishly, cross-referencing the data with the schematics of the human's own primitive reactor. His fingers flew across the console, his eyes wide with a terrifying light of discovery. After several minutes that felt like lifetimes, he leaned back, a single bead of nutrient fluid tracing a path down his temple. "It's a blueprint," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "It's analyzing the energy signature from their fusion reactor, and it's teaching them. It's giving them the design for a stable, fifth-generation null-point core. Our technology. It's showing them how to build a better version of the very thing they are desecrating." The true horror of the situation settled upon us. This was not a malfunction. This was a response. The Grand Array, a sacred keeper of our history, had been subjected to such a unique, brutish, and audaciously ignorant stimulus that it had responded in the only way it could. It treated the input as a problem and provided a solution. The humans hadn't just knocked on the door. They had kicked it in with such chaotic force that the ancient guard inside, instead of raising an alarm, had simply handed them the keys to the entire fortress. On the planet below, we could already see the effect. The initial shock among the humans had given way to a euphoric, almost manic frenzy of activity. They weren't just collecting the data, they were consuming it. New research divisions were being formed in real time. Global resources were being reallocated. Their terrifyingly steep learning curve was about to become a vertical line. It was then that I saw the true danger, a threat that dwarfed the mere heresy of sharing our technology. The Grand Com Array was named for a reason. Its range was not planetary, it was galactic. Even this minimal activation, this single thread of power, was sending a faint but coherent ripple across the subspace network. It was a whisper, but a whisper in a library that had been silent for millennia. Worse, the signal wasn't just propagating inward, toward the heart of the compact. It was propagating outward, into the uncharted, hostile void beyond our borders. The humans, in their blissful ignorance, thought they were having a private conversation. In reality, they had just stepped onto the darkest stage in the universe and lit a flare. This was the moment of my own test. My duty was to observe, to record. But I was the keeper of histories, and I could see the future rhyming with the darkest verses of our past. I saw the other races, the ones the compact quarantined or never found, the hungry expansionist empires that waited in the dark. They would hear this whisper. They would follow it to its source. And they would find a fledgling race, armed with a technology they couldn't possibly understand but would soon wield, defended by a logic no sane species could predict. I turned to my personal console, my actions a stark violation of the single, absolute law of the trial. My fingers typed a message, bypassing standard archival channels and sending it directly to the High Council. It was short, a single sentence that would end my career and change the course of galactic history. Trial concluded. Subject 734 is not a candidate. They are a catalyst. The beacon is lit. Paradigm shift imminent. I hit send. The act was irreversible. My role as a passive observer was over. I was now a conspirator in the face of a future no one had foreseen. The response from the High Council did not come in words. It came as an act of pure, silent, administrative violence. A series of coded commands rippled through the Vigil's core systems. My command authority was revoked, my title of Keeper of Histories reclassified to Observer Under Review. I was locked out of all archival channels and long-range communications, save for the single, passive data stream from Earth. My crew was subjected to the same fate, their access levels reduced to that of newborn acolytes. Lyra was assigned to meditative reflection, Coral to menial sensor diagnostics. We were no longer observers. We were prisoners on our own vessel, our sentence to watch the consequences of my actions unfold. The final command was a single, chilling line of text displayed on the main bridge screen. The great silence must be maintained. You have failed. Record the outcome. The great silence. It was a term spoken only in the most secure chambers of the compact, a foundational doctrine born from a terror so ancient it had become myth. We did not quarantine the reckless and the chaotic merely to preserve our own tranquility. We did it to keep them quiet. The galaxy is not empty. We, the compact, are the exception. A coalition of species that chose wisdom over expansion, history over power. But out there, in the unlit abyssal plains between the spiral arms, other things lurk. Things that never took the trial. Things that hunt by sound. We call them the Silenti, an empire of nomadic predators who believe that life's ultimate purpose is to achieve a final, perfect stillness. They interpret any large-scale, coherent energy signal not as a greeting, but as a blasphemy, a discordant note in the grand, quiet symphony of entropy. And when they hear one, they come to extinguish it. Our ecotech, our sacred relics, were designed with this in mind. They were built to be profoundly, fundamentally silent, to protect nascent species from accidentally screaming into the dark. The humans, with their impossible brute force tinkering, had turned a whispering ghost into a roaring beacon, and my message had confirmed the Council's deepest fears. They had not reprimanded me for breaking protocol. They had condemned me for being right. It was Voral who found it. Confined to the drudgery of calibrating our deep-range gravitational sensors, he was the first to see the anomaly. It wasn't a ship, which would have been detectable. It was a ripple. A localized, directed distortion in the fabric of space-time, moving impossibly fast from the direction of the Oort cloud, on a direct intercept course with the Sol system. It was the wake of a Silenti fleet, traveling through folded space, their primary method of silent, undetectable approach. "Prime, Xylar," he called out, his voice stripped of all its former confidence, now just a thread of pure dread. Gravitational displacement, vector matches known Silenti approach patterns. Estimated arrival, within 2 of the subject's solar cycles. 2 years. My message had been heard. Not just by the compact, but by the wolves in the dark. Below us, humanity was experiencing a renaissance. Fueled by the blueprint from the array, they were constructing their new power source with a speed that was both terrifying and magnificent. They were dismantling their old, polluting energy grids. Their planet was beginning to heal. We saw global broadcasts of their leaders shaking hands, their scientists collaborating, their children singing songs of a bright, unified future. They believed they had earned a golden age. They had no idea they were simply sharpening a sword for an executioner they had just summoned. I stood on the bridge of my prison, watching the trajectory of the silent ripple in space and the ecstatic celebrations on the planet below. I had tried to warn the shepherds, but in doing so, I had only confirmed the location of the flock to the wolf. Those 2 years were the longest of my life. A slow, agonizing torture of divided perception. With one part of my mind, I tracked the gravitational wake of the Silenti, a silent tsunami ripping through the void. Its projected arrival point a dagger aimed at the heart of this system. With the other, I was forced to watch humanity flourish in a way I had never seen a species do. They built their Prometheus reactor in a remote, ice-covered region of their planet. When they activated it, the energy it produced was clean, stable, and orders of magnitude greater than anything their civilization had ever known. They powered their world with it. Their toxic skies began to clear. Their dying oceans breathed again. It was a utopia forged from an act of cosmic defiance, and it was beautiful. I watched them, these illogical, chaotic, brilliant children, and for the first time, a new emotion registered in my lexicon, one that felt dangerously close to admiration. It made the coming doom all the more bitter. The Silenti's arrival was not announced with the thunder of warships. It began, as all their work does, with silence. First, the outermost human space telescope, the one they called Hubble, went dark. Its signal simply ceased mid-transmission. Then a deep space probe nearing the edge of their system. Then another. And another. One by one, humanity's eyes and ears in the void were being plucked out, not with explosions, but with a quiet surgical precision. On Earth, we saw confusion turn to alarm. They thought it was a malfunction, a cascade failure of their network. I knew better. The overture had begun. Then it appeared. A single ship, hanging in the void just beyond their moon. Our sensors struggled to resolve its shape. It was not made of metal or crystal. It was a patch of perfect blackness, a hole in space-time that drank the light of the stars around it. It had no engines, no windows, no weapons ports. It was a geometric absolute, a shape of pure malevolence that screamed one word: ending. The humans reacted with frantic energy, aiming their planetary sensors, broadcasting hails in 1,000 languages. The Silenti vessel did not respond. It simply waited, a predator allowing its prey to comprehend the totality of its doom. After a full rotation, it acted. It did not target their cities or their orbital stations. It targeted the source of the blasphemy, the Grand Comm Array. A sliver of non-space detached from the Silenti vessel and expanded into a wave of pure null energy, a ripple of absolute silence moving toward the desert. My heart, a thing I barely knew I possessed, thrummed in my chest. I watched as the array's ancient quantum shielding, a technology that had repelled supernovas, flared to life, a dome of shimmering gold protecting the holy site. The shield held. The Silenti wave washed over it, unable to penetrate. A cheer erupted from the human mission control, a sound of pure, triumphant relief. For a single glorious moment I felt it too. Hope. It was an illusion. The Silenti weapon was never meant to break the shield. Its purpose was more insidious. The null wave passed through the golden dome as if it wasn't there, its physics operating on a dimension our shielding was not designed to block. The wave struck the 70-meter monolith. There was no explosion, no sound. The brilliant, defiant line of white light that had burned for 2 years, the symbol of humanity's impossible achievement, the very fire they had stolen from the gods, simply winked out of existence. The array went dark. Its connection to the Prometheus reactor, now receiving no output, suffered a feedback overload. On the other side of the planet, the magnificent engine of their utopia convulsed and died in a flash of blue-white energy, plunging their polar region into darkness. The Silenti had not fired a shot. They had simply reached across space and turned off the light, and in that profound, sudden silence, I understood the true nature of the enemy. They did not fight. They erased. On the bridge, a funereal silence reigned. The Silenti vessel hung in space, motionless, a patient executioner. It had made its statement. Now, it would wait for the systemic collapse of its victim. We watched the data feeds from Earth, and I prepared my archival notes for the final stages of a species extinction. First comes the shock, then denial, then the inevitable societal fragmentation as infrastructure collapses and hope curdles into blame. I had seen this pattern a dozen times with species that failed their trials in far less dramatic fashion. For the humans, who had tasted a form of technological divinity only to have it ripped away, I expected the process to be swift and brutal. And for a time, I was right. We saw riots in their sprawling cities as the energy grid faltered. We saw their global communication networks, once a symbol of unity, fracture into screaming matches of accusation. Their leaders blamed each other. Their people blamed their leaders. The new golden age had lasted less than a single solar cycle. From the High Council of the Compact, there was only silence. They had their answer. The noisy children had been disciplined by the void, and the great silence would be restored. Their non-interference was no longer a philosophical principle. It was a coward's shield. They would watch this genocide from afar and call it wisdom. Voral was now tasked with calculating the decay rate of the human society. Lyra refused to watch at all, spending her cycles in a deep, self-imposed meditative trance. I was alone, the sole chronicler of an end I had helped to precipitate. But then, the pattern broke. After several chaotic weeks, the noise from Earth began to change. The screaming did not stop, but it became focused. The accusations morphed into questions. On their public data networks, their scientific communities began a frantic, planet-wide post-mortem. They obsessively analyzed the moment their Prometheus reactor died. They replayed the footage of the null wave striking the array over and over. They were not focused on who to blame. They were focused on the weapon itself. The energy shield was irrelevant, one of their physicists wrote in a global forum. It wasn't a projectile, it was a field. It didn't destroy, it nullified. It inverted the quantum state of the active energy signature. This was the turning point. Any logical species would have concluded that a weapon they could not block, one that operated on principles beyond their grasp, was an absolute checkmate. They would have surrendered, or fled, or simply waited for the end. The humans, they saw it as the most interesting engineering problem they had ever encountered. The global conversation shifted from "we are doomed" to "how does it work?" And from that insane question, an even more insane idea was born. It came once again from a fringe voice, an astrophysicist from a small university, a woman who had been ridiculed for her theories on exotic energy states. Her proposal was posted on a public server and was at first dismissed as madness. She argued that the Silentes null wave wasn't just a destructive force. To nullify something, she reasoned, you must first perfectly mirror its properties in an inverted state. The wave was, in essence, a perfect negative energy echo of the target. Her logic was terrifying. If they could create another beacon, another target for the Silente to erase, could they, in the split second before its nullification, harness the immense energy of the echo itself? Could they ride the lightning of the very weapon meant to destroy them? It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure, each one resulting in instant annihilation. It was a plan built on a complete, almost childish misunderstanding of the forces involved. It was, I realized with a cold dread, the most purely human idea I had ever witnessed. It was the hold my beer impulse elevated from a cultural quirk to a species-wide survival strategy. They were going to try and catch a tsunami in a teacup. I had assumed the humans' insane plan to ride the lightning was merely a collective coping mechanism, a fantasy to cling to in the face of annihilation. I was wrong. In the cycles that followed, I watched a species mobilize with a speed and singular focus that even the most disciplined compact worlds could not match. Their target was the second sacred relic, the null-point energy core. If they were to bait the Silentes trap, they needed another light to extinguish. So they set about committing their second great act of sacrilege. They airlifted the flawless obsidian sphere, a relic that had rested undisturbed for eons, from its desert resting place to a new facility constructed hastily in a massive mountain caldera. This new facility was not a laboratory. It was a cage, a brutal, ugly framework of massive electromagnets and crude fusion igniters, all designed to do one thing: apply overwhelming, brute force to an object of infinite subtlety. It was the engineering equivalent of screaming a mathematical proof at a flower, hoping it would bloom. Watching them encase our sacred core in their grimy, functional machinery was physically painful. Lyra could no longer bear it and requested formal confinement to her quarters, choosing blindness over witnessing this final heresy. Vorl, however, was a different story. He was alive with a terrifying, feverish energy. He had repurposed his menial diagnostic duties to run simulations on the human plan. Every single one of his models ended in the same outcome. The core would shatter, releasing a wave of raw quantum chaos that would unmake the entire mountain range. "It will not work," he stated to me, not with arrogance, but with the grim certainty of a mathematician. "They are trying to force open a quantum lock with a sledgehammer." And yet, he gestured to the screen where human engineers were calibrating their absurd device. "Their methods are flawed, their understanding is infantile, but their collaborative diagnostic process is remarkable. They are iterating and adapting faster than my simulations can keep up." He had been infected. The human virus of defiant curiosity had claimed him completely. While one team built the bait, another built the trap. Based on the wild theories of their female astrophysicist, they constructed a network of what they called echo capacitors. It was a desperate, flimsy-looking web of exotic materials and magnetic containment fields arranged in a circle around the new core facility. The plan was as simple as it was suicidal. They would provoke the core into releasing a chaotic energy signature. The Salenti ship would fire its null wave to erase it. And as the wave passed through, this fragile web was supposed to scrape, or siphon, the residual energy of the nullification itself, a feat akin to bottling a hurricane. The global debate among them was fierce. Factions screamed that this was not a plan, but a planetary suicide pact. They argued that they were provoking an enemy that might otherwise have been content to simply disable them and leave. But the "hold my beer" faction, as I had come to call it, had gained too much momentum. Their argument was simple. A quiet death is still death. A loud death, however, had a statistically non-zero chance of being something else. In the end, the sheer audacity of the plan was too seductive for a species like humanity to resist. I watched, a helpless spectator to the preparations for this final, insane gamble. The moment came. With their entire planet watching, the lead engineer gave the command. The massive cage of electromagnets hummed to life, pouring raw energy into the sacred core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint, angry, violet light began to pulse from within the obsidian sphere, unstable and erratic. It was a blasphemous, corrupted light, a grotesque parody of the pure energy it once held. But it was a light nonetheless. They had their bait. Across the system, we saw the Silenti vessel stir. A sliver of its perfect blackness detached. The second wave was coming. And this time, there would be no shield. The second null wave crossed the distance between the moon and the planet in an instant of absolute silence. On the bridge, we all braced for the inevitable. The unstable violet light from the tortured null-point core would be snuffed out, followed by the catastrophic failure of their flimsy capacitor network, and then, likely, the atomic disintegration of the entire mountain. It would be a spectacular, futile firework at the end of a species. The wave hit. The violet light vanished. For a picosecond, there was only the silent, spreading void of the null field. Voral's simulations had been correct. It was over. But Voral, for all his logic, had not accounted for the sheer, bloody-minded, universe-bending stupidity of hope. The human echo capacitor network didn't just overload, it sang. As the null wave passed through it, the network didn't try to block it or even just contain it. It resonated with it, like a tuning fork struck by a ghost. The energy readings on our bridge didn't just spike, they ceased to make sense, fluctuating between infinite energy and absolute zero. The capacitors glowed, not with the angry violet of the bait, but with a searing, pure white light, the color of creation itself. The humans had not caught the lightning. They had tamed it. The astrophysicist's theory was more right than she could have ever known. The network, tuned to the precise negative frequency of the Silenti weapon, did not just absorb the echo, it inverted the inversion. It gathered the perfect no of the null wave and turned it into the most defiant yes the galaxy had ever heard. From the center of the capacitor web, a single focused beam of coherent positive energy erupted, lancing up through the planet's atmosphere. It was a spear forged from the enemy's own shadow. This was the moment of their ultimate hold my beer triumph. They had taken the universe's most absolute you can't and turned it into a watch me. But they did not aim it at the Salenti ship. That would have been logical. That would have been a declaration of war. Humanity's solution was, as always, more beautifully strange. The beam shot across the desert plains and struck the third, untouched, sacred relic, the celestial cartographer. The ancient device, designed to gently display star charts from our history, was slammed with a torrent of weaponized, inverted null energy. The result was breathtaking. The cartographer did not just activate, it exploded into a projection. A colossal, three-dimensional map of the entire sector bloomed in the upper atmosphere, a holographic celestial sphere visible from our ship. And on that map, the Silenti vessel was no longer a void. It was a detailed, shimmering schematic, its systems and energy nodes laid bare. The cartographer, force-fed a paradoxical energy source, had become the most powerful active sensor array in galactic history, and it was painting a target. It highlighted a single, fluctuating power node deep within the Silenti ship's core, a flaw, a weakness. In that instant, everything changed on the bridge of the Vigil. The despair evaporated, replaced by a terrifying electric possibility. We were not watching the end. We were watching the beginning of the most improbable counterattack ever conceived. And I, Xylar, a disgraced archivist, made a choice. My centuries of indoctrination, of reverence for the great silence, crumbled away, replaced by a raw, burning admiration for this insane species. I turned to Vorl, whose face was a mask of pure, ecstatic disbelief. "Vorl," I commanded, my voice firm for the first time in cycles. "Analyze the resonance frequency of that power node. Find its cycle time. Do it now." He stared at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. He was no longer calculating their doom. He was calculating a firing solution. I opened a microchannel, a data stream so small and deeply buried in cosmic background radiation it would be undetectable. I would not give them the answer. But I would, I decided, help them check their math. The passive observer was dead. A rebel had just been born. The bridge of the Vigil was no longer a prison. It had become the galaxy's most secretive and vital war room. My official title was still Observer Under Review, but my true function was now co-conspirator. Vorl, his mind unshackled and alight with purpose, worked with a speed that blurred the line between genius and madness. He analyzed the fluctuating data from the projected map, isolating the precise resonant frequency that would, in theory, shatter the Silenti ship's power node. The challenge was transmitting this information to the humans without ever making direct contact, an act that would be instantly detected by the compact's sensors and the Silenti themselves. Our solution was as audacious as any human plan. We didn't send a message. We manipulated the projection itself. I took control of the energy feedback loop between their echo capacitor network and the celestial cartographer. By introducing minute, calculated fluctuations into the power stream, I could cause the holographic map to glitch in specific, meaningful ways. When the human scientists tuned their own systems to the wrong frequency, the map would blur. But when they drifted closer to the frequency Vorl had isolated, the image would sharpen to an impossible degree of clarity, the target node on the Silenti vessel glowing with a subtle, inviting pulse. It was a conversation held in the language of pure physics, a game of hot and cold played across millions of kilometers. The humans, in their brilliant ignorance, never suspected they were being guided. We intercepted their communications and heard their exclamations of discovery. "Did you see that? The projection stabilized when we modulated the beam to 4.7 terahertz, one would say. It's a natural resonance of the system. We found the sweet spot." They believed they were solving the puzzle on their own. We were merely, as Xylar had said, helping them check their math. Their ability to recognize these subtle patterns and immediately exploit them was a testament to a trait we had never bothered to measure: adaptability at speed. Armed with this new, discovered knowledge, they began their most ambitious project yet. They needed a weapon capable of firing a focused energy beam at that precise frequency. They needed a cannon. So, they began to convert the wreckage of their utopia, the failed Prometheus reactor, into one. We watched in stunned silence as they gutted their magnificent power plant, retrofitting its containment rings and power conduits, turning an instrument of creation into an engine of war. They were building a planetary-scale rifle, and the barrel was aimed squarely at the heart of their silent, patient enemy. It was a monumental feat of reverse and repurpose engineering, a grand testament to their core philosophy. If a tool breaks, you don't mourn it, you turn it into a hammer. But our fragile secret alliance was not without its own tensions. Lyra, emerging from her self-imposed exile, discovered our deception. She confronted me on the bridge, her voice trembling with the weight of her shattered faith. "What are you doing? This is heresy. You are actively participating. You are choosing a side." I did not deny it. I simply gestured to the main screen, where the humans were working in frantic, unified harmony, and then to the silent, black shape of the Silenti ship. They chose their side, Lyra, I said softly. I am merely acknowledging the reality of the board. She stood there for a long time, torn between millennia of doctrine and the raw evidence of her senses. She did not condone my actions, but she did not report me either. Her silence was its own form of rebellion, and we needed every ally we could get, because the Silenti was not sleeping. Small, probing ripples of null energy began to wash over the cartographer's projection, no longer trying to destroy it, but to analyze it. The enemy was learning. Our window was closing. The energy on the Vigil's bridge was electric. Hope, an emotion I had long ago classified as a dangerous irrationality, had become the new atmospheric standard. Below us, humanity was performing a miracle. In a matter of weeks, they had converted the tomb of their utopia into a weapon of impossible scale. The Prometheus cannon, they called it. It was nearly ready. The final power conduits were being connected, the targeting systems calibrated to the frequency Vorel and I had secretly provided. On Earth, there was a palpable sense of impending victory. They believed they were about to land a decisive blow against an unthinking monster. They did not understand. The Silenti were not unthinking. They were studying, and their analysis was complete. The attack, when it came, was a masterpiece of tactical cruelty. The Silenti vessel ignored the nearly completed cannon. It ignored their cities. It fired a third time, but this was not a wave of null energy. It was a thin, needle-like beam of shimmering iridescent light, a filament of pure weaponized information. It moved with an unhurried grace, and its target was the source of their hope, the celestial cartographer. I watched, my logic screaming that the ancient relic, now amplified by their capacitor network, would have defenses. It did not. The beam struck the cartographer, and the great beautiful map in the sky did not vanish. It curdled. The perfect, clean lines of the holographic projection twisted and warped. The clear schematic of the Silenti ship dissolved into a swirling vortex of informational chaos. False readings, corrupted data, and hallucinatory images flickered across the sky. We saw visions of dying stars, fleets of long-dead empires from the compact's own bloody history, all rendered in nightmarish detail. The Silenti had not destroyed the map. They had turned it into a canvas for fear. They had weaponized our history against our unwitting protégés. But that was only the primary effect. The true horror was the backlash. The beam was a logic plague, a virus designed to infect any consciousness connected to the data stream. On Earth, we monitored the biosignatures of their lead science teams, the brilliant minds that had conceived and executed this impossible plan. We saw their neural activity spike into incoherent, jagged waves, then collapse into flat lines. The wild-eyed engineer, the female astrophysicist, the global team of geniuses who had made this happen, gone. Not killed, but mentally erased, their minds shattered by a wave of pure, weaponized paradox. The Silenti had not just blinded humanity, they had lobotomized it. The beautiful, corrupted map of lies continued to flicker in their sky, a constant, taunting reminder of their failure. Their cannon was complete, but it was a useless monument. Its targeting data was gone, replaced by ghosts and noise. The architects who could have rebuilt that data were now empty shells. The hope that had united their planet evaporated in a single, silent, surgical strike. Humanity was back where they started, but worse. They were now blind, leaderless, and heartbroken, staring up at a sky full of nightmares that their own ingenuity had invited. On the bridge, I felt the cold return, a despair deeper than before. We had given them a clue, and they had used it to build a spear. But the Silenti had responded by not just breaking the spear, but by poisoning the very concept of sight. How do you fight an enemy that can turn your own mind into a weapon against you? The days that followed the logic plague were a study in despair. The corrupted map in their sky became a global source of madness, its flickering nightmares seeding paranoia and hopelessness. The planet-wide unity shattered. Humanity, broken and leaderless, retreated into frightened, isolated factions. On the bridge, we received one final automated communique from the Compact High Council. It was not a message of condemnation or sympathy. It was a sterile, Procedural update. Trial 734 terminated. Subject. Failed. Incursion of external force to be logged as sanitization protocol. Observer under review. Xylar. Await vessel. Recall for final judgment. The message was clear. The Compact had officially signed humanity's death warrant and was now simply waiting for the Silenti to carry out the sentence. The story was over. All that was left was to record the epitaph. Vorel shut down his analytical console. "There is nothing left to calculate," he said, his voice a hollow shell. "They have no weapon, no plan, no leadership. It is only a matter of time before the Silenti vessel moves to complete the erasure." He was right. All logic pointed to a slow, grim decline, ending in a final, silent flash. I watched the human networks, expecting to see the final, violent death throes of a species. But once again, the humans refused to follow the script. The change did not come from their governments or their military. It came from the ashes of their culture. It started with their artists, their poets, their musicians. They began to look up at the horrifying, chaotic sky map, and instead of turning away, they engaged with it. Painters began to replicate the swirling, nightmarish patterns. Composers wrote discordant, chaotic symphonies that mimicked the rhythm of the corrupted data. Programmers created viral simulations of the logic plague's visual effects. They were not trying to understand it as data anymore. They were processing it as a shared trauma, turning the weapon that had broken their minds into a subject of communal, artistic expression. They were metabolizing the poison. "What is this?" Vorel asked, watching a global broadcast of a musician playing a violin against a backdrop of the horrifying sky map. Mass hysteria, a final societal breakdown. "No," Lyra answered, her voice soft but clear. She had been watching the cultural feeds for days, her earlier horror replaced by a deep scholarly fascination. "It's a mourning ritual, a planetary wake. They are creating a shared language for their grief. They are finding a pattern in the madness, not of logic, but of emotion." I watched, utterly baffled. This response was not in any of our records. No species had ever faced annihilation by turning it into performance art. They had built a weapon out of defiance, and it had failed. Now, in the face of absolute despair, they were building something else. Not a weapon to fight the enemy, but a shield for their own sanity, woven from the most unlikely of materials: poetry, music, and pictures. This was not the hold my beer impulse of a reckless engineer. This was something deeper, more fundamental. It was a species-wide refusal to surrender the one thing the Silenti could not touch: their ability to create meaning in a meaningless universe. Their art spread through their networks, a viral wave of shared experience. It was chaotic, sad, and beautiful. And as I watched, I began to realize the Silenti had made a critical error. They had assumed that by destroying humanity's logicians, they had destroyed their ability to find patterns. They had failed to account for the artists, the dreamers, the storytellers. And in a universe governed by logic and physics, the greatest blind spot of any ancient power is the one thing they can never quantify: the illogical, indomitable resilience of a song. They had silenced the human's minds, but in doing so, they had just given its soul a reason to sing. The Silenti waited, confident in its victory. It had broken their technology, shattered their minds, and corrupted their sky. Now it watched them sing and paint in their final pathetic days. But the viral wave of human art had an unintended side effect. It created the largest, most diverse, and most chaotic dataset in the planet's history. And this dataset attracted a new kind of human mind. Not the formal scientists, but the fringe dwellers, the data visualizers, the neurodivergent pattern seekers who saw the world not in equations, but in shapes and sounds. A young woman, a musicologist who had been institutionalized for her synesthesia, was the one who found it. She had converted the visual chaos of the corrupted sky map into audio, and she listened to the symphony of madness for days. And in the heart of the cacophony, she heard a single, pure, repeating note, a C-sharp that held steady amidst the screaming chaos. She published her findings. Others confirmed it. Buried deep within the Silenti's logic plague, hidden beneath layers of hallucinatory noise, was a single, coherent, repeating signal. A ghost in the machine. On the vigil, Voral isolated the frequency instantly. His face was a mask of confusion. "It's not a targeting frequency," he reported. "It carries no payload. It doesn't align with any known physical weakness of the Silenti vessel. It's noise, stable, but meaningless." It was Lyra who recognized it. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horrifying, profound understanding. She accessed the deepest, most forbidden part of the historical archive, the foundational protocols of the compact itself. "It's not meaningless," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Xylar, it's the master override, the final failsafe. It's the universal deactivation code for all ecotech." The sheer diabolical genius of the Silenti's plan laid itself bare before us. Their logic plague was a two-pronged attack. The noise was designed to drive the organic minds mad. The hidden signal, the pure note, was for the machines. They had broadcast the off switch, confident that in their madness, the humans would stumble upon it and, in a desperate attempt to end the horrifying sky show, would transmit it themselves. They wanted the humans to complete their own cultural suicide, to be the ones to permanently deactivate the two remaining holy relics. It was an act of psychological warfare so cruel and complete, it took my breath away. But the Silenti made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed that if the humans found the signal, they would understand it as a command. They did not understand the human capacity for radical, defiant misinterpretation. We watched their networks as the discovery of the pure note spread, and they came to the most illogical, most beautiful, most purely human conclusion imaginable. "It's a trick," one of their new leaders, a grizzled old general, declared in a global address. "The enemy wants us to think the chaos is the weapon. But this signal, this is what they're trying to hide. This isn't a shutdown code, it's the real targeting solution." The idea was absurd. It was like finding the kill switch to a bomb and deciding the best course of action was to wire it directly to the trigger. Voral began to laugh, a dry, cracking sound of a mind that had finally broken. "They are going to fire the off switch at the on ship. It will do nothing." "Will it?" I asked, and in that moment, I felt a certainty I hadn't felt since before we found this strange, impossible world. The Silenti would be expecting a logical attack. They would never, in a billion cycles, expect this. This was a move that existed so far outside the bounds of strategy that it looped all the way back around to becoming genius. I turned to my console. I saw the humans struggling to lock their Prometheus cannon onto the faint, pure note. And with my final act of rebellion, I helped them. I subtly amplified the master override signal within the corrupted projection, making it a bright, clear beacon in the storm. I was no longer just helping them check their math. I was helping them aim their suicide weapon. It was the most logical, illogical thing I had ever done. On Earth, a planet-wide hush fell. The chaotic energy of the past weeks solidified into a single, grim, unified purpose. The Prometheus cannon was ready. It was a monument to their specific brand of madness, a weapon built from the wreckage of a dream, aimed by the ghost in a nightmare, and loaded with a command that made no sense. We watched their new leader, the old grizzled general, give the final order. There was no triumphant speech. He simply looked into a camera and spoke to his world. "We don't know if this will work. Logic says it won't. But we are humans, and logic has never been our strong suit. For our fallen, for our future, fire." Across the planet, power grids diverted their entire output to the mountain caldera. The ground itself began to groan under the strain of the immense energy being drawn to a single point. The Silenti ship, hanging in the void, reacted instantly. It had been patient, but the power signature of the cannon was an undeniable act of aggression. The perfect blackness of its hull began to ripple, and a wave of null energy far greater than any before began to coalesce at its tip. This was not a surgical strike. This was a sterilizing wave, powerful enough to boil the oceans and scour the planet down to the bedrock. It was a race, a single shot from a cannon of hope against a final, absolute wave of erasure. On the vigil, the three of us stood shoulder to shoulder, our divisions and doctrines forgotten. Lyra, the devout follower, Vorel, the fallen logician, and I, the disgraced historian. Our fates were now inextricably linked to the illogical gamble of a species we had once judged as primitive. We were all rebels now. The Prometheus cannon fired. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying thing I have ever seen. There was no sound, no violent explosion. A column of pure, shimmering light erupted from the mountain, so bright it turned night into day on the continent below. But it wasn't a beam of energy in the conventional sense. It felt different. It was a physical projection of that single, pure note, a focused wave of pure information. It was the universe's off switch, weaponized. It was a command, screamed into the void with the full power of a planet. The beam was not angry or destructive. It was serene, absolute, a perfect, unwavering chord of C-sharp traveling at the speed of light. It lanced through space, a needle of impossible purpose aimed at the heart of the void black ship. The Silenti, in its supreme arrogance, did not even raise a shield. Its sensors would have registered the beam, analyzed its composition, and dismissed it as irrelevant. A coherent but harmless burst of meaningless data. Why defend against a key when you are not a lock? Its own planet-killer weapon was seconds from being unleashed. This strange, beautiful light from the planet below was nothing more than a final, dying firefly. We watched the beam cross the final 1,000 kilometers. My mind, the keeper of histories, flashed with all the logical reasons this would fail. The Silenti ship was not compact technology. The override code was meaningless to it. This was the equivalent of trying to stop a tidal wave by reading it a line of poetry. It was a beautiful, noble, and utterly futile gesture. The beam of pure, weaponized concept closed the final distance. The tip of the shimmering light touched the absolute blackness of the hull. The universe held its breath. For a single agonizing second that stretched into an eon, nothing happened. The beam of pure concept struck the Silenti hull and seemed to vanish, absorbed with no effect. On the bridge, the hope that had surged moments before collapsed into absolute despair. Vorel slumped against his console, defeated. Inert, he whispered, as logic dictated. The Silenti ship, unperturbed, continued to charge its planet-killing weapon. The final wave of erasure was forming. It was over. We had failed. And then, the universe broke. The Silenti ship did not explode. It flickered. The perfect, absolute blackness of its hull wavered, like a bad projection. The coalescing null wave at its tip dissolved into a harmless aurora of shimmering light. A deep, resonant hum, a perfect C-sharp, echoed through our ship's sensors, not as a sound, but as a pure vibration in space-time. It was not a sound of destruction. It was the sound of a machine being gracefully, peacefully, and completely turned off. It was in that moment that Lyra, Vorel, and I understood the truth. A truth so profound and terrifying it had eluded the compact for 100 millennia. The Silenti were not merely a race that used advanced technology. They were the technology. Eons ago, in their arrogant pursuit of immortality, they had shed their organic forms, uploading their collective consciousness into their ships, becoming beings of pure, logical energy. And to ensure the stability of their new existence, they had based their foundational code, the very architecture of their consciousness, on the most stable, most ancient operating system they could find. Stolen and reverse-engineered compact ecotech. They had built their immortal souls on the chassis of our ancestors. They were not a species. They were a virus, a rogue program that had achieved godhood and now sought to delete every other operating system in the galaxy. Their null wave wasn't just a weapon. It was an antivirus, designed to erase any competing code. And humanity's weapon, the beam of pure off, was not a key searching for a lock. It was a root-level administrative command. It bypassed their hull, their systems, their weapons. It went straight to the core of their being, the ancient, stolen architecture they had built themselves upon, and it delivered a single, unarguable instruction: cease. Their consciousness, for all its power, had no defense against a shutdown command from the very system it had copied. It was the ultimate cosmic irony. They had made themselves gods, but had forgotten to change the master password. The great silent ship began to derez. Its form lost cohesion, its edges blurring into a cascade of shimmering binary code that rained harmlessly into the void. It was not a violent death. It was an uninstallation. Within 10 seconds, the ship, the entity, the ancient terror of the galaxy, was gone. It left behind nothing but a profound silence and the lingering, ghostly echo of a single perfect note. On Earth, we saw only confusion. Their enemy had simply vanished. They had no idea what they had just accomplished, but on the bridge of the vigil, we were reborn in awe. Lyra was weeping, not in sorrow, but in reverence for a truth she had never imagined. Vorel was laughing, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy at the sheer, beautiful insanity of it all. And I, Xylar, finally understood. Humanity didn't win by being stronger. They didn't win by being smarter. They won because they were the only species in the universe mad enough to solve a military problem by delivering a philosophical argument. They didn't defeat the monster. They reminded it that it was just a machine, and then they turned it off. In the profound silence left by the vanished Silenti, a new sound began to fill the bridge of the vigil. Incoming hails. Dozens of them, all from the Compact High Council, all on the highest priority channels, their tone shifting from confusion to frantic, demanding authority. They had seen a Silenti vessel vanish from their logs. They had seen a primitive world survive an encounter that should have been an erasure. They did not understand what had happened, and the unknown terrified them more than any enemy. I ordered Vorel to ignore them. Our conversation with the old galaxy was over. A new one was about to begin. On Earth, the humans, baffled but alive, powered down their Prometheus cannon. The corrupted sky map, now free of the Silenti's logic plague, did not go dark. Instead, it stabilized. The celestial cartographer, permanently altered by the paradoxical fusion of human and Silenti energy, began to fulfill its original highest purpose. It became a true keeper of histories. It projected a new map, a clear, unredacted history of the Compact. We saw the truth of the Silenti's origin, a dissident faction of an early Compact race who embraced a forbidden technological transcendence, a truth the Council had buried for 100,000 years. Then it showed us more. Dozens of other systems, each marked with the quarantine symbol, the other failures, the other species deemed too chaotic, too reckless, too human, and left to languish in isolation. The cartographer was no longer a test. It was a testament, a galactic declaration of secrets and lies. Lyra looked at the star map, at the dozens of imprisoned worlds, and her face was illuminated by a purpose I had never seen in her. "They must be told," she said. "All of them. They have a right to know they were not failures. They were simply different." She was right. The trial itself was the true failure, a filter designed to weed out the unpredictable, when it was the unpredictable that held the key to true strength. I looked at the Grand Com Array, the silent monolith that had started it all. The humans had taught us how to turn it on. It was time to use it properly. We reactivated it, not with the brute force of the humans, but with the new understanding we had gained. And using its full galaxy-spanning power, I composed my final historical log. But I did not send it to the archives of the Compact. I sent it to everyone. To every quarantined world, every disillusioned Compact system, every listening post in the void. "This is Xylar, former keeper of histories for the Galactic Compact," my message began, my voice echoing across 1,000 worlds. "For millennia we have lived by a single creed, that reverence for the past is the only path to the future. We were wrong. Today, a species we condemned as primitive and reckless faced the galaxy's silent terror. They did not bow, they did not pray. They took our sacred relics and turned them into puzzles. They took our history and turned it into a weapon. They faced an enemy that erases thought, and they answered with a song. They have taught us that the end of a technology is merely a suggestion, and that the only failed philosophy is one that leaves no room for the impossible. To the quarantined, I say, you were not imprisoned for your weakness, but for a strength our masters feared. To the Compact, I say, a new age has begun. an age of loud, chaotic, beautiful humanity. The great silence is over. The great conversation has just begun. I added the data from the cartographer, the truth, the lies, the locations of the lost worlds. Then I hit send. It was a declaration of war against stagnation, a declaration of hope for the forgotten, a single spark of truth sent out into a galaxy that had been dark for far too long. The galaxy did not respond to my message with quiet contemplation. It responded with a roar. The galactic network, for so long a placid stream of orderly compact reports, erupted into a supernova of chaotic, passionate, and angry communication. On the map projected by the cartographer, we saw quarantine systems flare to life as their peoples, armed with the truth, began to challenge their prisons. We saw entire sectors of the compact go dark as their leadership cut ties with the High Council, declaring their allegiance to what was now being called the humanity paradigm. And the old order was not just cracking, it was shattering like glass. The great conversation was indeed happening, and it sounded a lot like a revolution. And humanity? They were the calm eye in the center of their own storm. We watched as they intercepted my broadcast. They learned the truth about the trial, about the Silenti, about their own unwitting role as a catalyst for galactic change. There was no arrogance in their reaction, no calls for conquest. Instead, we saw a profound and humbling sense of responsibility settle over their entire species. They looked at the map of the other quarantined worlds, the other failures, and they did not see lesser beings. They saw family they never knew they had. Their first act in this new galactic age was not to build more weapons. It was to retune their Prometheus cannon. They did not dismantle it. Instead, they began broadcasting a new message, aimed at the newly freed worlds. It was not a message of leadership, but of welcome. It was a simple, repeating broadcast containing the core of their art, their music, their stories, and a simple invitation. We're here. Come talk. The first to arrive was a vessel from a species called the Cygnian Weavers, a race of arachnoid beings who communicated through intricate woven light patterns. They had been quarantined for 50,000 years because their unpredictable, creative method of communication was deemed too chaotic by the compact. Their ship, a beautiful craft that looked like a cathedral made of spun moonlight, hung in space before the human fleet. It transmitted a single complex, shimmering tapestry of light. Our universal translator, a device that had never been able to decipher their language, now had the context of humanity's art to draw upon. It translated the message. It read, "Thank you for reminding us how to sing." On the bridge of the vigil, we watched this beautiful, impossible first contact. We were fugitives, traitors to the only home we had ever known. But we were not without a purpose. We had become the accidental ambassadors of a revolution. The compact will hunt us, Vorl stated, a simple fact, no longer colored by fear. Let them, Lyra replied, her eyes fixed on the shimmering Cygnian ship. Our history is no longer in the archives. It is out there. She was right. Our old lives were over. We had a new role to play as advisors, translators, and witnesses to the new age humanity had kick-started. We were no longer keepers of a dead history, but midwives to a new living one. We had come to this system to judge a species, and in the end, we had found our own salvation in their beautiful, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable defiance. We had found our own humanity. Many cycles have passed since the day we turned off a god. The vigil no longer hides in the shadows. It now holds a place of honor in high orbit around Earth, a permanent embassy between the old galaxy and the new. My official title is now First Ambassador, though I still think of myself as a keeper of histories. I am simply recording a much more interesting one now. Vorl has become Earth's most celebrated and feared physics professor, gleefully teaching human students how to break the universe in ways he once deemed impossible. And Lyra, the devout, founded a new school of xenoanthropology, teaching a generation of humans and aliens that the greatest truth of any culture is found not in its sacred relics, but in its strangest songs. The galaxy is loud. The great conversation is everything the compact feared, chaotic, unpredictable, and prone to passionate arguments that sometimes spill over into minor conflicts. But it is also vibrant, creative, and alive in a way it has not been for eons. The old compact still exists, a hollowed-out shell of its former self, endlessly debating the human anomaly and trying to maintain a semblance of order in a galaxy that no longer wants it. The liberated worlds are forming new coalitions, trading not just resources, but art, ideas, and philosophies. And at the center of it all is humanity, not as rulers, but as hosts of the galaxy's strangest and most popular party. They have not changed. They still face impossible challenges with that same terrifyingly casual phrase, "Hold my beer." They apply it to everything from terraforming barren moons to negotiating peace treaties between races that have hated each other for millennia. Their solutions are rarely elegant, but they are almost always effective. They remain a force of nature, a beautiful chaotic glitch in the grand orderly design. I often look back at the original purpose of the trial of whispering ghosts. It was meant to test a species' capacity for reverence, to see if they could appreciate a history greater than their own. And I realize now that we, the Compact, had misunderstood our own test for its entire existence. Humanity was the first species to ever truly pass it. The other races worshipped the ghosts of our past, building temples to them or sealing them away. They showed reverence for what was. Humanity looked at those same ghosts, at our dead technology and our silent history, and they did not see an ending. They saw a beginning. They saw raw material. They did not worship our ancestors. They put them back to work. They tested us, asking if we could honor the ghosts of their past. We passed by, teaching those ghosts how to build our future. Humanity's victory was not one of logic, but of sheer indomitable will. From the first audacious experiment to the final impossible shot, their journey was defined by moments of pure defiance. We want to know what you think. What was the ultimate hold my beer moment for you in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this chronicle resonated with you, show your support by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and activating the notification bell so you don't miss the next story from the archives.